and welcome back. This is episode 9 of my vlog series about creating the art for a 2D video game. And Merry almost Christmas. It is December 20th at the time of this recording, so Christmas is just around the corner. So I hope whatever you're celebrating or not celebrating is going well for you.
No. Hey, buddy.
My son just walked in. I don't know if you can hear him, but he is in the room with me and going through all of the Christmas presents. Hey!
Hey! No touching.
I've been using the office as just like my sort of base of operations for all my wrapping, and the kids are starting to notice that there's just like this growing pile of loot in here. My son is now picking up all of the wrapping paper rolls and is going to use them as swords because that's what you do when you're 4. Anyway, so I hope you enjoy this more podcasty episode today. Last week I had the idea to talk about perfectionism, and I thought that would be a good topic and be kind of a chill episode, so feel free to go about your business as I talk in the background. Or if you are watching, you will be watching me draw some characters. So we've been trying to flesh out our game, flesh out the cast, and so I'm going to be working on some character sprite sheets in the background while I talk. And if you stick around until the end, I will show you the finished sprite sheets for these characters. None of these guys have been implemented into the game just yet, but I can still show you the finished sprite sheets and so you can see what the finished product looks like. But let's get back to the topic at hand. So today I'm going to be talking about perfectionism, and specifically, not just about perfectionism, but things that you can do to help you sort of get over it. So for most of my growing up years, and even into college, I definitely would have described myself as a perfectionist. But I feel like now that I've gotten a little bit older, hopefully a little bit wiser, a little more self-aware, I feel like I've chilled out a lot. And I don't know if it's anything special I did necessarily, but having a little bit more perspective, a few more years under my belt has definitely helped. And let's be honest, I've definitely gotten lazier as I've gotten older too, which has also helped me to lower my standards a little bit, and so hopefully I can help you do the same, but in a healthy sort of way and not an unhealthy sort of way. So anyway, yes, our topic today is about overcoming perfectionism, and I feel like it's a really good topic for artists and any creatives really, because I feel like this tends to be a nearly universal problem among the creative type. So throughout this week I've been thinking about, what is perfectionism, or at least where does it come from? And I've come to a conclusion, and I will defend this, so stick with me even if you don't agree, and feel free to argue if you want down in the comments, but I feel like perfectionism isn't really the desire to be perfect. I think perfectionism is not the desire to be perfect, but the desire to be perceived as being perfect. In other words, I'm pretty sure it's just like a pride thing. And I could be wrong about that, and feel free to disagree if you want, but I feel like I need to defend that, so, here it goes. So, I was thinking about, different examples or different instances in which, somebody might experience, perfectionism, and if you took other people out of the equation, would that instinct, still exist? So, one of the situations I was thinking of is so what if in your house there was a room that only you could go in, for your entire life till death do you part, nobody else, not your spouse, significant other, not your children, not your parents, not your friends, nobody else would enter that room. And I was thinking about it, would I bother to keep that room clean? And I think I would, clean it occasionally if I, spilled something on the floor. And I'm sure I would use that room, for example, to, wrap Christmas presents and keep my kids out of them. I'm sure I would use that room. But would I keep it, immaculately clean? And I think, at least for me, I think the answer would be no. And there might be some weirdos of you out there, just kidding, no, I really don't mean you're weird, but there might be some of you out there who would, but I think the majority of us would not really worry about keeping that room, spotless, because nobody else would ever go in there. And along the same vein, would you decorate that room, to a Chip and Joanna Gaines, level of decoration? Would you follow all of the latest interior design trends and keep that place, that special little space, totally, on trend? Would you worry about that? I don't think I would. I mean, I'm sure I would make it comfortable because if, I'm going to be spending any time in there, and I'm sure I would spend time in there, but I think that's what it would be. It's just like a comfortable space, and I don't think it would be a spotless space or an immaculate kind of space. Because I think that desire, that perfectionism, keeping a clean house, staying, on top of the latest trends, a lot of those things have more to do with other people than they have to do with you. So having said that, I feel like I can come to the conclusion that I think perfectionism has more to do with who you are desiring to please than it has to do with you. For example, when I was a kid, I was definitely like a straight A student, never got into any trouble, was very quiet, like super, super shy. But, even though I was a good student and I got good grades, my grade was definitely more important to me than my education was. Because my grade was the thing I brought home to show to my parents. It was the thing I had to, get from my teacher. It had more to do with trying to please my family and try and make them proud than it did with, my education. I was not nearly as concerned about learning things as I was with just, passing my classes. And I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having a high standard for yourself. I think that's a good thing and a healthy thing. But I think the problem comes, at least for artists, who have, an extreme sense of perfectionism, is that it can really cause them to, sometimes it can cause somebody to quit altogether, but more often than not, I think it just causes a person to freeze. And I definitely experienced this when I was in college. It was really the first time, I grew up in a very small town and had a really small school with not a lot of, opportunities. We had really good teachers, but there just wasn't all the extracurricular stuff. So when I went to college and started studying art, it was really the first time I'd been around a whole bunch of other artists and any professional artists, and just the level, that some of these other students were at was really intimidating to me. And it's not that I stopped creating, but by the time I got through, by the time I came home with that diploma, I was, my art had gotten very predictable. It was very safe stuff. I didn't experiment, and I didn't really take any risks because it was more important to me to get that good, perfect grade than it was for me to really improve and to really hone my craft. And that leads me very nicely into my first tip. I think I came up with 4. I'll have to check my notes, but I have some tips now for how I went about sort of getting over that freeze that was caused just by having to be perfect all the time. And my first tip is to create in a bubble, and that is going to defy all of conventional wisdom. But I found, so after I got done, graduated with my degree in art, and, I got married and moved on to the next phase of my life, I found that, I really, I had a strong desire to keep learning more. I just felt like there was just so much more to learn than what I had, I just barely scratched the surface, with my college experience. And so I started taking a bunch of online courses and just learning from books, and I would go to the library and get stuff there. And all of a sudden, I didn't have to impress anyone anymore. I didn't have professors giving me a grade. I didn't have to put my work up on the wall, for a critique. And I didn't have to post it online unless I wanted to, and most of the time I did not want to because it, like I said, it was not perfect. But when I started, going through just my own little education, I really leveled up a lot faster because I was happy to just learn and to study, and when the grade, when that tangible gold star mark of perfection was no longer a factor, and when nobody else had to see my work, all of a sudden, progress, which leads me to tip number 2, which is to stop wanting what you can't have. Progress is attainable, perfection is not. And human beings are notorious for wanting things we can't have. The harder something is to attain, the more we want it. So, for much of history, every woman, and actually men, if you've read enough literature, wanted, pearly, milky white, flawless skin. And the reason for that is because many people made their living working out in the sun outside, and so they had rough skin, they had tan skin, and having really milky white fair skin was a sign of prosperity. It meant that you did not have to work outside with your hands. Nowadays, all of the girls want the beautiful bronzed skin, and the reason for that is most of us live a very sedentary lifestyle, and we spend most of our time inside and don't go outdoors unless we absolutely have to, and so suddenly having a beautiful bronzed, bikini body tan is the desirable thing. We always want what we cannot have, or at least what is really, really difficult for us to have. And so, keeping that in mind, that perfection is not possible, so quit wanting it, and instead focus on progress, because that is attainable. That should really help you to, change your mindset when you are working on a project or working on something, and you are inclined to keep noodling away at it, or you're getting frustrated with it because it just isn't perfect yet. Became the goal instead of perfection, which is actually really the takeaway from this whole, from my whole spiel here, is that your goal should really be progress and not perfection. And that brings me to tip number 3, which is to recognize that, and this rule, I need to preface this rule only applies to arts and artsy stuff, okay? Like, do not apply this to your everyday life. But this is tip number 3. And it is to recognize that the rules only apply until they are inconvenient to you. So sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, there are no rules in art, there are no rights or wrongs. And that's sort of kind of true, but I find it super unhelpful. Like I said, I was a perfectionist, so I do like some hard, fast rules to follow. And I do feel like some of those exist. Yes, your eyes are going to be drawn to areas of higher contrast, for the most part. Yes, certain compositions are more visually pleasing than others. Yes, that is a truth, I feel like. Certain colors look better together than others. There is such a thing as correct anatomy. There is such a thing as correct perspective. So I feel like there are some rules, but when it starts to get to the point, and when I'm creating a piece, I always start by following the rules until something isn't working, until I'm following the rules and something still isn't working, and then I break them. So if I'm working on a piece and I'm using reference and I'm following the reference, but I find that just, the silhouette of that character is just not very clear, even though it might be, I might have copied the reference line for line, which you probably shouldn't do, but anyway, this is an example. Even if I, copied the reference directly and my picture is, correct, quote unquote, if that is not working, if that silhouette is not very readable, if my values aren't there, I can always change them. I can always tweak something. I can change the colors to something fairly unnatural. I can add a light source that probably logically wouldn't be there. I can make a pose slightly awkward as long as nobody catches me. There are all kinds of things you can do to make that piece work that may not be quote-unquote correct, and they may, break the rules, but if they make the piece better, go for it. And so I've found that keeping that in mind has really helped me, that yes, I'll follow the rules, but once they become inconvenient for me, they go out the window. And that leads us to tip number 4, in which we come full circle back to that first assertion that I made, that perfection has more to do with looking perfect to other people than it does with actually being perfect. And so tip number 4 is to figure out who you are trying to impress or to please. It might be your professor. Maybe you want to get that piece perfect so that your professor will give you a good critique or will give you a good grade. Maybe you want to get it perfect because this is a gift for somebody. You want to give this gift to, a friend, a parent, somebody special to you. And so you really want to get this piece absolutely perfect because you are going to be giving it to somebody else. Maybe you want to get it perfect because you have a following, maybe you have a social media following and you really don't want them to see your garbage drawing. And so there's usually, I find that if I'm experiencing, those moments where I just absolutely want to get something perfect and I'm super frustrated, a lot of times it's because there is another person in the equation, or, more than one other person. And I find if I can just identify who that person is or those people are and why I feel the need to impress them or feel the need to create something that they will see, as flawless or whatever, I find if I can usually pin down that feeling, it really helps it to go away, actually. Usually once you can name a feeling, that I totally sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'm really not a psychiatrist, but I feel like once you can, pin down that feeling and where it comes from, it really helps. It actually helps you to heal from that and to move on from that. So that is definitely, I think, one of the most helpful tips that I've come up with in this list. So hopefully all of those together will help you to loosen up a little bit with your work. And speaking of my work, now that I'm getting to the end of my little spiel here, I'm just going to show you these character sprites. I'm going to show you the finished ones up on the screen, and hopefully you enjoyed this process, watching me make some characters for our game. And of course, as always, I will be back next week with another episode, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, or a very Merry whatever it is you do or do not celebrate. Bye!